Hello, everybody. So today we're going to do lists of lists, or otherwise called two-dimensional lists. So a two-dimensional list, or a nested list, or a list of lists is basically a list that contains other lists as elements. So, for example, we've seen lists that have integers, that have strings, but there's nothing to say that you can't just have another list as one of your elements. So here, for example, we have a list, legends, and the first element in this list is another list, that is Leia and Luke. Then that's separated by a comma, and then the second element in the list is another list, um, which has Aragorn and Legolas in it. And then finally, the third element in the list is again another list, and this time it has Picard and Data. So Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Anyway, so here are some legends. And let's go ahead and copy legends. So this is a list of lists. And let's open up a terminal. And let's go into interactive mode. And bring this down. And let's have a look at our list of list legends. So there it is. So you can see the actual list itself is denoted by the square brackets. And then each element is separated by a comma, just like any other list. And then the lists inside of them, or the sublists, they are also regular lists. There's square brackets, and the elements inside of those are separated by commas. Now, if we wanted to go and get the first element in this list legends, all we would need to do, just like before, is say legends index 0. And that will return the first element, which just happens to be another list. And that sublist contains Leia Luke. If we wanted to get the second item in the list, we would use index 1, just like any normal list, and that would return another list, which is Aragorn Legolas. Now, it can be helpful to think of lists um, as having rows and columns. So here I've rewritten legends out so that you can see here is each row, and then the column you can see going downwards. So for example, in row 0, we have Leia Luke. In row 1, we have the sublist with Aragorn Legolas. In row 2, we have the sublist with Picard and Data. And then in addition to that, we also have our columns. So the first item in each of these sublists is considered to have column 0. So there we have Leia, Aragorn, and Picard. And then the second column, would have column 1, be Luke, Legolas, and Data. So if we wanted to go and access, say, Leia, we would have to go to row 0 and column 0. And the way that we do that is we have two square brackets. So if I want to access Leia from Legends, I need to go to row 0. So there's my row. And then I need to go to my column 0. So the second square bracket is my column. And that would give me Leia. Right? If I wanted to get Luke, then I go to row 0, column 1, and that would give me Luke. Right? So you can see here in this next slide, you can go and get any of these elements from Legends. So you could get Aragorn, you could get Legolas. So for example, if I wanted to get Data, so I would need to go to row 2, and then I want to go to column 1, and there's my Data. So it can take a little bit of time to get into nested lists, but the best thing you can do is lots and lots of practice. So we're going to do that now, and we're also going to look at breaking them down in different ways, such as Python Tutor Visualize, and we're going to write them out. So this example, let's look at this for a moment. So here we have a import random, then we have two variables, rows, columns, and then we have a list of lists already created values, and each of the values have been set to 0. Then we have a nested for loop, and we're using that nested for loop to fill up our nested list. So you can see here R, the row, is being used in that first square bracket for the rows. And then C for column is in the innermost loop is being used up in the column square bracket. So let's actually go and have a look at this one. So if you want to, first of all, copy and paste it, run it in Sublime. I called mine 2D list.py. Actually, we can run it together right now. So we can exit out of this one and let's go into CS110 in class, week 10, and then 2D lists. Now, what's happening here is that, you see, I've actually got a extra line in here that you don't need to have right now. So we can comment that out and run that again. So what's happening here is on each iteration of these nested for loops, one of these elements is getting filled with some random number between 1 and 100. So let's actually go and have a look at what's happening here if we go to Python Tutor Visualize. So if you want to open up Python Tutor Visualize and copy and paste your code into there, and let's go ahead and run it step by step. Now, it might look a little bit weird. So I know that this helps some people and then this doesn't help other people using Python Tutor Visualize. So we're going to try different things, and it's okay if this doesn't help you. We'll also write them out later on. So here are variables, rows, and cols. Okay, now values is created, you see here. Now here, okay, this is what I mean. Sometimes it can look a bit intimidating. So values is pointing to a list with the indices 0, 1, 2, and 3. That's because we have these 4 rows. Now, each one of these is also pointing to another list, hence the term list of lists. So in the first element of this one with the index 0, we have another little list, and this one has index 0, and this one has index 1. And then this one with index 1, this one has index 0, this one has index 1. So if this helps you learn better, that's totally fine too. So here we have index 0. So if we wanted to access, say, this 0, we would say index 0, and then the second square bracket 0. If we wanted to get this one, we would say index 0, and then this one square bracket would be 1. And so you can see here how it's set up. Then we go to the next one. So we enter our outer for loop. So remember, we're using range. Range default starts at 0. So R has the value 0. And again with C, as you know, range starts at default 0. So C has the value 0. Then we say value 0, 0. So we know that's going to point to index 0. And then that's going to point to this 0. And you can see here that first one is going to get filled up with some random integer between 1 and 100. And in this case, that happened to be 50. So in this first iteration, this one got filled up to 50. Okay, then we go through again in a loop. Now, C is going to have the value 1. So it's going to go to 0, and then it's going to go to 1 here. So you can see now that one has been filled and set to 98. Okay, so now we're done with our inner loop, so we'll go back to our outer loop. So now R is going to have the value 1 and C is going to restart at 0. So now we're going to go to this index 1 and then we're going to go to this 0. And you can see this one gets filled. Then C is going to have the value 1. So we're going to have R1, C1, which will be this one. And that gets filled with a random number. And you can see here, as we iterate through our nested for loop, one by one, they get filled up. And then when we're done, we're going to print our whole nested list here. So you can see why at this point it is critical that you understand for loops by item and that you understand your nested for loops that we were looking at a couple of weeks ago. And that's why nested for loops are so important, because they help us work with nested lists. So just like before, our outer loop is the row, the inner loop is the column, and you can go and access all the different elements of your nested list using your nested loop. Okay. So now we're going to look at it in a slightly different way. We're going to write it out. And so a nice way to think about it is that the outer loop refers to the sublist as a whole. So like remember each row is like a whole sublist. And then the inner loop refers to each element of the sublist. Now I changed legends a little bit so that one of the sublists has a different length. So we've added Sam from Lord of the Rings into the Lord of the Rings sublist. Very underrated character. And we're going to actually iterate through this list legends using two methods. So the first one we're going to do by index, which you can see here, right? And the second one we're going to do by item, which you can see here. So I'd like you to create a new file, legends. So you have your list of list legends at the top, and then you can copy and paste referencing through it by index and by item. So let's run both of these first, and then we're going to step through each one in detail. So let's do Python 3 legends.py. So, so this is running both of them. So you can see here, if I highlight, this is from the first one by index, and then this second one is by item. So they're doing exactly the same thing. And what I'd like to do this time is step through it with pen and paper. So you can step through it with me. You're also very welcome to put it into Python Tutor Visualize as well. I just want to show you two different ways of doing it so you can do whichever way works best for you. So let's go and I'm going to make this narrow and pop this on the right hand side. And let's go and step through. So just let me change my setup here. Okay. So first of all, let's do it by index. So this is our outer loop iteration. So remember, by index, so row is going to be an index number. And remember, we're using range. So range by default, row will have the value 0. Now you can see here, let me get rid of this, that you can see here that we say for row in range length legends. So if you have a look at legends and have a look and see what you think the length of legends is, if I go back here, You can have a look. So the length of legends is actually 3. We have 3 items in the list legends. Here's the first item, here's the second item, here's the third item, right? And these 3 items just happen to be lists. So when you see in line 4, range length legends, this is essentially saying range 3. Okay, so we're saying for row in range 3, then we're saying print legends row. So as we know, row has the value 0. So what is legends 0? Well, legends 0 is a list. And it's the first list. And it's Leah, Luke. So if you go back to your terminal and look at your print, that is the first thing that you print out, right? So let's go back here. So we've just printed legend 0. Now we're going to go into our inner loop for col in range, and then we have len, and then we have legends, and then row. So what's happening here? So this can look a little bit scary at first, but don't be scared. Remember that legends row is just this. It's Leah Luke, right? And what is the length of that? We know that's 2. There's 2 elements in that list. So this is the same as saying for col in range 2. Okay, so we're going to do our inner loop. And the first iteration, col is going to have the value 0. Right? So then we go to line 7, print legends, and then we have our 2 square brackets row col. So we know that row is 0, and we know that col is 0. So we're saying legend 0, 0. And we know that Leah is row 0, column 0. So we're going to print Leah. So if you go back to your terminal, you'll see that the second one is Leah. All right? Okay. Now we have to finish our innermost loop. So we're going to say inner iteration, we say column 1, then we're going to print legends 0, 1. And that's going to be Luke. Then we finish our innermost because remember that we only had range 2. So we're going to go back to our outer loop, do a second iteration. Now row is going to have the value 1. And the first thing we do straight away is print legends 1. And what is the index 1 of legends? It's this second list. So the next thing that gets printed out is Aragorn, Legolas, and Sam. Right? Okay. Then we're going to go to our inner loop. So first iteration. So for col in range length legends row. Now remember legends row, so legends 1 is this list, and the length of this is 3. So this is equivalent to saying for col in range 3. Right? So then we're going to print. So the first value of col is going to be 0 because we have range, and range default starts at 0. We know that. So we're going to say legends row 1 col 0. And we know that's going to be Aragorn. Then we're going to iterate again. Then it's going to be row 1 col 1. That's Legolas. And then we have row 1 col 2, which is Sam. So if you look at your terminal, you can see there that that's what you're printing. And then we finished our innermost loop, so then we have to go back to the outer loop. And now row is the value 2. So we're going to print legends 2. We know that's the last sublist. So that's Picard and data. And then we go to our inner loop, call 1. So we're going to say print legends 2, 0, which is Picard. And then we're going to say 2, 1, which is data. And that is our nested for loop by index. Okay, so let me just get rid of these. Okay. So now let's look at our nested for loop by item. So now we're going to do for row in legends. So remember that, let's look at our legends again. So when we use nested or any kind of for loop by item, we're always going to go and get the item, like the first item of the list. And the first item of the list in this case is another list. It's Leia Luke. So let's go back to here. So we say outer loop 1. Row this time is going to have the value Leia Luke. So it's not an index, it's a value. It's a value from the list legends. Then we're going to print row. So row is Leia Luke. Okay. Then we're going to go to our inner loop. So we're going to go to inner loop iteration 1. Now call is going to be the first element in row. And what is row? Row is a list. So it's going to be the first element, which is Leia. And then we print call, which is Leia. And then we do our next iteration because we haven't finished this list. And the next item in the list is Luke. So call will have the value Luke. Then we print Luke. And then we finished our inner loop. So we go back to our outer loop. So outer loop 2. And the second item in the list legends is another list. And for the purposes of space, I'm just going to put the first letter of each name. So we have A for Aragorn, L for Legolas, and we have S for Sam. Okay. So then we go and print row. So we're going to print our list. Aragorn, Legolas, and Sam. Then we're going to go into our inner loop. And we're going to go and get the first item from the list row, which is Aragorn. And then we're going to print that. So we print Aragorn. Then we go get the second item from the list in the second iteration, which is Legolas. And we print Legolas. And then the third item, which is Sam. And we print Sam. Then we go back to our outer loop. And then the final element in Legends is another list with Picard and data. So we're going to print that. So I say PD. And then we go to our inner loop and we get the first item from that list, which is Picard, and we print Picard. And we get the second item, which is data. And we print data. So if you compare this with the first one that you just wrote out, I think it'll be really interesting for you to see, you know, the by item and by index, and they both produce the same output, but the target variables have different values. So if you're not clear on for loops by item, for loops by index, please go back and review that from the earlier lectures, particularly the list part 1 lecture where we go over that in great detail, so that you can come back and understand it fully when we do lists of lists.